If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the business of lifelong learning, you're in the right place. I'm Celisa Steele.
And I'm Jeff Cobb, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast.
Welcome to episode 206 of the Leading Learning Podcast. In this episode, we address the question, what kind of return on investment will we get from implementing a new or replacement learning management system? That's a question we've helped a lot of organizations wrestle with, but we also have reasons to feel that now is a particularly good time to address this question.
That's right. And the main reason is that we have launched a new demonstration event for learning management systems. The event is an offshoot of our Review My LMS site, and we're calling it Live Review. You can get the details by going to live.reviewmylms.com, but the quick version is that Live Review offers an easy, effective, and affordable way to get demonstrations of platforms that are a good fit for learning businesses. Most listeners will know that by learning business, we mean organizations that market and sell education to adult lifelong learners. That's what we focus on here at Leading Learning. And we know from long experience that the platforms that work well for these types of businesses are quite different from the usual corporate or academic systems. So Live Review showcases platforms that we know meet the needs of learning businesses. And to get the details on how to attend Live Review and also get the recordings, again, just go to live.reviewmylms.com.
If you do plan to attend Live Review, and actually even if you don't, this episode will give you some great food for thought on how to get the most out of your learning platform investment. We have the big overarching question about ROI that we are going to turn to momentarily to guide our discussion for this episode, but we also want to keep up our practice of asking reflection questions for you to consider during and after the episode. So as you're listening, ask yourself, 1, what are some concrete ways in which an LMS supports the creation and delivery of new products or enhances the revenue potential of existing products? What should the LMS enable us to do that we could not do without it? And 2, what are some concrete and measurable ways that having an LMS in place will contribute to fulfilling the overall mission and vision of our organization?
So now for our big question for this episode, what kind of return on investment will we get from implementing a new or replacement learning management system? And we usually don't get this techie, I guess, in our episodes, but this just seems to be a burning question for many learning and education businesses, and it's certainly an area in which we have some experience. And, we find that sometimes organizations get bogged down with answering the question and spend way too much time and in some cases money searching for a very precise answer to this question about implementing a learning management system. And of course, analysis paralysis sets in. And then other times, unfortunately, we discover that the question hasn't been asked at all. There's not really any consideration of return on investment from putting the learning management system in place before the organization goes out and proceeds with licensing and implementing an expensive solution.
And so in our experience, sanity, as very often is the case, lies somewhere in between these two extremes. And so what we want to offer in this episode are 5 factors to consider and to try to answer, at least within reason, before you sign on the dotted line for a learning management system. So the first of those 5 factors is new revenue generation. So how directly will the LMS support the creation and delivery of new products or enhance the revenue potential of existing products? And, if you're putting an LMS in for the first time, at a minimum, that LMS should enable you to increase the reach of your educational offerings. And that means both in terms of quantity and depth. So what I mean by that is that you should be able to connect with more learners. So that's the quantity. And then for the learners you already serve, you should be able to engage them with additional options. So that's the depth. And it's impossible to know the exact revenues associated with this increased reach, but you still should be able to make some educated guesses.
What, for example, if there was an online version of one of your most popular face-to-face offerings, surely you'd be able to reach at least 5%, say, of that potential audience that you're not currently reaching. And 5% is somewhat arbitrary, but we also know from research that we've done that that's usually the bottom end of penetration with a new online education offering. So, 5% is a good sort of stake in the ground, and surely you can reach that many and use that as a base for calculating your potential revenue. So, for those who are frequently attending your offerings, whether online or off, what spin-offs or related offerings could you create from your most popular offerings? And again, surely you can reach a percentage of that audience with new offerings.
And I'll note that what Jeff was just advocating, what we're advocating in general, is working with your most popular current content. And we know that organizations often shy away from this approach. They think that they need to reach new audiences with new products, but that's actually one of the very hardest ways to expand a business. We also sometimes hear from organizations that they're afraid that they're going to cannibalize their current face-to-face offerings if they offer online versions. And we just wanted to note that we've never seen this happen, and in fact, almost always the opposite happens, where having that added online offering that complements the face-to-face actually produces a net gain overall. Now, some of the key benefits of working with current popular offerings are, number one, you have a reasonable idea of the untapped audience. Second, you have an existing pricing approach and you can leverage that. And then third, you usually have a good idea of what is driving demand. And so that allows you to be much clearer and articulate about how to position and promote the new offerings. And so with this information in hand, making some of those conservative, educated guesses about potential revenue shouldn't be all that hard, so you can fire up an Excel spreadsheet, run the numbers, for the next 3 years.
And so that's the first factor, new revenue generation. And again, if you know something about your current products and something about your current audience for those products, you ought to be able to make some reasonable conservative guesses and run some numbers to project out revenues for the next 3 years, as Celisa was saying. Now, the second factor is kind of the flip side of that equation, and that's cost savings. So you'd be asking here, in addition to any new revenue potential, what cost savings will putting an LMS in place make possible? And so, while putting an LMS in place or switching to a new one will certainly create some cost, it should also lead to productivity increases that ultimately decrease cost. And in some cases, that cost decrease may be relatively small. So, for example, in one of our recent client engagements, the client calculated an annual savings of approximately $3,000 based on the reduced amount of time that staff would need to spend handling requests for processing continuing education. And that often eats up a fair amount of staff time around face-to-face events. On the other hand, the decrease can be quite large. So we had another organization that calculated an annual savings of $65,000 on reduced staff time and mailing costs related to processing and issuing certificates. And those savings alone were enough to justify implementation of an LMS, even though that organization was not projecting new revenue to materialize anytime soon.
If you're looking for a learning management system that is built for learning businesses and can help you both cut costs and generate new revenue, check out our sponsor for this quarter.
Community Brands provides a suite of cloud-based software for organizations to engage and grow relationships with the individuals they serve, including association management software, learning management software, job board software, and event management software. Community Brands' award-winning Crowd Wisdom learning platform is among the world's best LMSs for corporate extended enterprise and is a leading LMS for association-driven professional education programs. Award-winning Freestone, Community Brands' live event learning platform, is a leading platform for live learning event capture, webinars, webcast, and on-demand streaming. Find out more at leadinglearning.com/communitybrands.
And so those examples that you're just offering there, Jeff, they suggest that, an LMS is not just about courses. And that's something we want to be sure and emphasize here. It's also about managing learning, and that generally includes credits and certificates. And then at a higher level, an LMS is also about operational efficiency, and operational efficiency pretty much always produces cost savings. So You want to take a hard look at where your costs, particularly your labor costs, are with respect to the delivery and management of education. You want to determine the efficiencies an LMS could help create, and then you want to make some conservative estimates of the associated dollar figures that go along with those savings. So those are the first two, the revenue potential and then cost savings. And then the third factor to consider is basically general value perception. So if we implement a first or a replacement LMS, to what extent will this increase our current members' perception of the value that we provide as an organization? To what extent might it help us attract new members? To what extent may it elevate our overall brand as an important contributor to our field or industry? So to get at answers to those questions, you usually need to ask some other questions first. So for example, how much use are your members or potential members currently making of e-learning? And where are they going for that e-learning? Are they getting enough of the right types of e-learning? Are there segments that are being significantly underserved? This is data that can actually be gathered pretty easily through some properly crafted survey questions, although in our experience, it's often not the type of data that's being gathered by organizations.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, if it's clear that key parts of your audience are making significant use of e-learning from sources other than your organization, which is something you can find out by surveying, then you have a clear opportunity for elevating value perception by providing new options that align with learner needs. And then additionally, using the LMS to deliver educational content in support of critical strategic initiatives can also significantly elevate value perception. So if, for example, your organization is determined it must better support the pipeline of future workers into your industry, which is obviously a very common goal these days, then the delivery of online education to support, say, a certification or an assessment-based certificate or a series of digital badges may be a very powerful tactic.
And I'll offer a note of caution here. Many organizations will come to us and say, we need to implement an LMS and we need to start delivering online education. And when you ask why, it's just so that they can be perceived as keeping up with the times. And, if that's the main driver for implementing an LMS, we say don't do it or don't do it yet. You really need to revisit these points that we've just talked about and put some work into figuring out the more tangible types of return. So now the fourth factor is user experience. So how will implementing an LMS improve the overall experience that learners have with our educational offerings? How will it help our offerings be more impactful? And how will we know? So these questions, this fourth area of user experience, is really closely related to the value perception questions that we were talking about immediately before this. But we think that user experience deserves to be considered on its own. So if you are seeking to provide a better user experience, the first thing is you've got to make sure that you know where you're starting from. Don't just rely on opinion and anecdotes, although there are likely to be plenty of those flying around. Instead, we recommend that you make use of services like usertesting.com and Usability Hub, and so you can actually test and gather data about the experience you're currently providing. And then that'll allow you to know your starting point, and once you know that, then you can craft the most compelling vision possible for where and how much you can realistically improve on the current experience. And you're going to also know where improvement is most needed, and that's going to help ensure that you ultimately invest in the right features and functionalities to improve that user experience.
And of course, you raised the question of how will we know, Celisa? And so this is an area you're going to want to return to. If you clearly establish a benchmark through testing up front, then you'll be able to repeat testing over time to see how you are performing against the benchmark. And, that's a novel idea, I know, but one that can clearly establish whether or not an LMS is producing the desired return. And of course, this is all about return on investment here that we're talking about. So we've talked about new revenue generation. We've talked about cost savings. We've talked about general value perception. We just talked about user experience. We promised 5 factors, and the fifth one is fulfillment of mission and vision. So the question here is going to be, how will implementing a new or replacement LMS contribute to fulfilling the mission and vision of the organization? And, while this may seem like a difficult question to answer in a measurable way, definitely don't ignore it. It speaks directly to, for example, the responsibility of board members, who are often the people who are going to have to approve the budget for an initial or replacement learning management system. Now, generally speaking, to the extent that you are elevating value perception, improving user experience, and supporting a financially sustainable approach to delivering education, which is what we've covered really in the first 4 factors, then you are, in fact, helping to fulfill mission and vision. So you're already well on your way with the points that we've already talked about. And these are, of course, as we've already pointed out, measurable points. Now, keep in mind that, when it comes to mission and vision, reach and impact are usually critical. And those are, 2 factors we talk a lot about here, reach and impact, along with revenue. So if an LMS enables you to reach many more people across your field or industry with useful learning experiences, even ones that you're not charging for, that would contribute to mission and vision for really pretty much any organization I've ever encountered. And of course, reach can always be measured. If you're reaching more people, you're going to know that from the data that you're going to get from a learning management system.
And if you're able to show that you're having an impact with the learning experiences that you deliver through the LMS, that is, that you're actually changing the field for the better by elevating knowledge and skills and behaviors, then you qualify in our books as a learning leader, and we think someone better be processing your promotion papers. All that said, though, an LMS alone is not going to achieve this. Any learning management system is ultimately only as good as the learning experiences that it supports, and those experiences got to be expertly designed and facilitated. But capturing the data that shows impact, particularly through thoughtful assessment strategies, that should be a strength of any well-designed LMS. And so you just need to know what kind of data is going to demonstrate impact that aligns with your mission and vision, and then set up to track that.
And so those are the 5 factors. Go through those again. New revenue, cost savings, general value, perception, improved user experience, and then supporting the mission and vision. But, put those all together and, to pursue all of those, really, it all comes back to strategy. So, knowing what kind of data will demonstrate impact that aligns with mission and vision is, of course, a direct outcome of having a solid strategy for your learning and education business, and knowing things like your cost structure, your revenue structure, what you want the value perception to be, what you want that user experience to be. All of that needs to align with strategy.
So when it comes right down to it, getting the highest possible return off of implementing an LMS starts with knowing the strategy that the LMS supports. And that's why we always start with clarifying strategic objectives in our 7-step LMS selection process, because if you have your objectives solidly in place, then the 5 points that we just talked about are going to flow naturally, and you're going to be on the road to getting a really high return off of your LMS investment.
So there you have it. Just you put those 5 factors to work right away. Make sure they're lined up with your strategy, and really, truly, you should be in a good position to get a very strong and a measurable return off of implementing, whether it's your first learning management system or whether it's a replacement learning management system. But certainly, above everything else, think of this stuff up front before you go out and start, vetting systems, getting worried about, the technologies and the features and the functions and which vendors. You need this stuff in place first, and then that clarifies everything else immensely. It makes the whole process just a lot easier and ultimately a lot more effective. So that's our take on getting a return on investment on a learning management system, or ROI on LMS for short. To get show notes for this episode, which will contain links to a variety of resources, go to leadinglearning.com/episode 206. The show notes will, of course, include the reflection questions for this episode, which are: 1, what are some concrete ways in which an LMS supports the creation and delivery of new products or enhances the revenue potential of existing products? What should it enable us to do that we could not do without it? And then 2nd, what are some concrete and measurable ways that having an LMS in place will contribute to fulfilling the overall mission and vision of our organization?
When you check out the show notes, you're going to see various options for subscribing to the podcast. And if you're getting value out of what you hear, Jeff and I would be truly grateful if you would subscribe, as it helps us to get some data on the impact of what we're doing.
And we would be grateful if you'd take just a minute to give us a rating on Apple Podcast. Just go to leadinglearning.com/Apple. That'll put you in the right place. Celisa and I personally appreciate your rating and review, but more importantly, reviews and ratings help the podcast show up when people search for content on leading a learning business.
We'd also be grateful if you would check out our sponsor for this quarter. Visit Community Brands at leadinglearning.com/communitybrands.
And finally, consider following us and sharing the good word about Leading Learning. You can find us on Twitter by going to leadinglearning.com/Twitter, on Facebook at leadinglearning.com/Facebook, and you're probably picking up the pattern now on LinkedIn at leadinglearning.com/LinkedIn. And we also encourage you to use the hashtag #LeadingLearning whenever you share anything from us or whenever you tweet anything useful to learning businesses in general. However you do it, please do follow us and help spread the word about Leading Learning.
Thanks again, and see you next time on the Leading Learning Podcast.